Meanwhile, Victor continued talking loudly, filling the restaurant with his voice, enjoying the attention he thought he deserved. And he did not know that the woman he mocked was not just a waitress, but someone with a stronger mind and a deeper strength than he could ever guess. And he did not know that every careless insult he threw into the air was building a future moment he would never forget. Emily looked at the doorway leading back into the dining area, and she felt something shift inside her, like a quiet promise forming in her heart. A promise that she would not let this man walk away believing he could step on people without consequence. And she straightened her apron slowly, ready to face him again. What she did not know yet was that this part of the story was only the beginning, and the moment of truth was getting closer with every step she took. Emily stepped out of the kitchen again with a calm breath, and anyone watching her could see that something inside her had changed, something steady and strong now. And she no longer moved like someone trying to escape the storm, but like someone preparing to walk straight through it with quiet courage. Victor sat at his table with the same smug look, acting as if the whole restaurant existed only to serve him. And he kept glancing at Emily with cold amusement, waiting for another chance to insult her. Believing she would remain silent, no matter what he said, Emily approached the table with her notepad held neatly in her hand. And though she wore the same gentle smile as before, her eyes now carried a spark that hinted at something deeper. Something Victor did not notice because he was too busy enjoying his own arrogance as she reached him. Victor spoke in German again, louder than before, making cruel jokes about her appearance and her job, laughing with his partner as if mocking her were a game that made him feel powerful. And he was certain she understood nothing. Emily heard every word. Yet instead of hurting her more, the insults built a quiet strength inside her, reminding her of all the difficulties she had faced in her past and how she had overcome them with patience and determination. She waited for them to finish laughing, then asked softly if they needed anything else. And her voice was so calm that a few nearby customers turned their heads, surprised by her ability to stay composed under such pressure. Victor ignored her question and waved his hand in a dismissive motion, continuing his loud complaints about the restaurant and the service, acting as if everything around him was beneath someone like him. Emily stood silently while he talked, but her thoughts drifted to her time in Germany, to long days of studying the language with passion, to teachers who praised her skill, to friends who admired her patience. And she felt warmth inside her heart as she remembered how hard she had worked to master the language he now misused so carelessly. She recalled the joy she felt each time she understood complex sentences and held meaningful conversations with locals. And those moments filled her with pride even now as she faced a man who believed he was above her. As she thought about those memories, she also remembered the challenges she faced during her early days in a foreign country, the moments she struggled to fit in, the many hours she spent practicing her accent, and the small victories that slowly built her confidence. And these reminders made her feel grounded and steady in the present moment. In the busy room, when she looked at Victor again, she noticed his grammar errors, his broken phrases, and his poor pronunciation. And she realized he spoke not to communicate but to belittle. And this understanding gave her a quiet sense of power he did not know she held. Emily stepped back and said she would return with the rest of his order, her voice gentle but confident. And when she walked away, several customers watched her with admiration for her grace under pressure. Victor watched her leave and muttered another insult, laughing with his partner as if the situation was fully in his control. But something about her calm expression made him feel a small uneasiness deep inside. When Emily reached the counter, she placed her hand on the surface and closed her eyes for a moment, letting her breath settle, and she felt a new strength rising from within. A strength that came from knowing a truth Victor could not imagine. A coworker asked if she was all right, and she nodded, choosing not to share anything yet, because she knew the story was heading toward a moment of change. and she wanted to face that moment with clarity and control as she prepared the next items for Victor's table. She heard his loud voice echoing across the restaurant, filled with arrogance, and each careless word reminded her why she needed to hold her ground and show that respect mattered more than wealth or pride. Emily straightened her apron, lifted her chin, and took a slow, steady breath, feeling ready for whatever came next. And when she stepped out of the kitchen again, she walked not like someone trying to please a rude customer, but like someone who carried a hidden truth strong enough to shift the balance of the moment. As Puthi, a rude customer, she approached Victor's table once more. She sensed the energy around her changing, and she knew that the man who believed he controlled everything was about to discover how deeply he had underestimated the quiet waitress standing before him. Emily walked back toward Victor's table carrying the rest of his order, and even from a distance she could hear him laughing loudly in that same arrogant way that filled the whole restaurant with discomfort. And something inside her told her that the moment she had been holding back was finally coming closer with every step. She took. Victor leaned forward as she approached, his eyes shining with the kind of confidence that came from believing he could never be challenged. And he whispered another cruel comment in German to his partner, calling her slow and clueless and unimportant. And his partner laughed so loudly that a few nearby customers turned to stare with frowns on their faces. Emily placed the dishes on the table one by one, her hands steady and her posture calm. And for a moment, Victor looked annoyed that she was not reacting in fear or anger, because he expected her to be upset, expected her to shrink under the weight of his insults. But her silence confused him in a way he could not explain. He leaned back in his chair and spoke in German again, this time raising his voice so the insult was clear, as if he wanted to test how much disrespect she would tolerate. And he joked about how someone like her should never dream of being more than a simple worker, because people without power had no value in his eyes. Emily felt the sting of each word, but she also felt the fire inside her growing, a warm and steady fire that made her stand a little taller and breathe a little deeper, because the time she had been waiting for had finally arrived. The time to stop listening and start speaking. But she did not speak yet. Not immediately, because she wanted the moment to land with perfect clarity. And she wanted everyone around to see exactly who Victor truly was before she revealed her truth. Victor smirked at her silence as if he had won something, and he lifted his fork with a grand gesture, then complained loudly about the food, saying the restaurant was lucky he even stepped inside. And he made another remark in German about her being too simple to understand real culture or real language. Emily took one small step closer, and the soft sound of her shoes on the floor made Victor glance at her with irritation. And he opened his mouth to add another insult. But before he could speak, she looked him directly in the eyes with a calm and steady gaze that made him pause for the first time since arriving. The Pesma restaurant seemed to shift into a strange kind of silence. The kind of silence that comes right before a moment no one expects. And several customers leaned forward slightly as if sensing something important was about to happen. Emily lifted her chin just a little and spoke in fluent, perfect German, her voice smooth and clear and confident, repeating Victor's most recent insult word for word exactly the way he said it, matching his tone but exposing his cruelty in front of everyone in the room. Victor froze with his fork halfway to his mouth, his eyes widening as if the world had suddenly tilted under his feet. And his partner stared at Emily with an expression of total disbelief, unable to process what he had just heard. A few customers gasped softly, others covered their mouths, and the restaurant felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a hidden truth had been released into the air after being locked away for too long. Emily continued speaking in German, but this time she corrected his grammar, corrected his pronunciation, corrected every mistake he had made, showing not anger but absolute mastery of the language he had used to insult her. And her voice carried a quiet strength that filled the space with dignity and confidence. Victor tried to respond in German, But his words came out twisted and clumsy, and the more he struggled, the more obvious it became that he had never truly learned the language. He had only learned enough to appear superior. And now that false superiority was falling apart in front of everyone watching. Emily waited patiently for him to finish stumbling through his broken sentences. Then she responded again in flawless German, explaining gently but firmly that mocking someone in a language you barely understand only reveals your own weakness, not theirs. And her calm tone made her words even more powerful. Victor's face turned red with shock and embarrassment, and he slammed his fork onto the table in frustration, switching back to English and demanding to know who she thought she was. But his voice shook in a way that betrayed his fear and confusion. Emily remained composed, her posture steady, her expression kind but strong, and she said in a quiet, clear voice that she understood every word he had spoken since the moment he arrived, and that choosing to stay silent had been her decision, not a sign of weakness. The room felt charged with expectation, as if everyone waited to see what would happen next. And for the first time since he walked through the door, Victor felt something he had not felt in years, something he had almost forgotten existed, something he did not recognize at first but could not ignore. It was the feeling of being powerless. Emily stood in the center of the restaurant, with every eye fixed on her as Victor tried to regain his balance in this situation, yet his pride was slipping through his fingers like water, and he could not stop it, no matter how hard he tried. And his partner sat frozen, unable to understand how the quiet waitress had turned the moment upside down with only her voice and her confidence. Emily remained calm even as Victor's anger rose like a boiling wave, and she could see the confusion in his eyes, the shock, the disbelief, and also something else, something he had not shown before, a hint of fear. The fear of being exposed, the fear of losing the control he believed he owned everywhere he went. And this fear made him look less powerful, less untouchable, and more like a man who had finally met someone he could not intimidate. She stepped back slightly as the restaurant manager walked out. However, the man everyone thought was the manager was not the one truly in charge, and Emily knew the moment had arrived, the moment she had avoided for a long time, the moment she never needed to use before, but now it was necessary because Victor had crossed every line of respect and kindness. The man walked toward Victor with slow steps, and the guests watched silently, unsure of what would happen next, and Victor straightened himself as if preparing to argue, thinking he could dominate the situation if he just spoke loudly enough. But before he could say anything, the man turned to the room and spoke in a clear, steady voice, saying that Emily was not only a waitress, she was the owner of the entire restaurant. Victor's shoulders stiffened and his eyes widened again as the truth hit him like a heavy wave, and his partner nearly choked in shock, while several customers gasped softly because none of them had ever imagined that the woman serving tables with such humility was the one who held the highest position in the place. Emily looked at Victor with the same calm expression she had worn all day, but now there was something more in her eyes, a quiet strength that came from knowing she had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. And the room felt warmer, kinder, full of respect toward her and full of judgment toward the man who had mocked her without shame. Victor opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out, and he tried again. But still nothing, and for the first time in his life, silence seemed louder than anything he could have said, and Emily used that silence to step forward with grace, her voice soft but powerful as she explained that she had chosen to work alongside her staff because she wanted to understand her customers better and treat everyone with fairness and dignity. She said that her parents had built the restaurant with love, and she continued their legacy not with pride, but with responsibility. And she glanced around the room as she spoke, thanking the customers and the staff for their kindness, their patience, and their support, and her sincerity made several people smile with admiration. Victor, however, felt a coldness spreading through his chest because everything he had assumed was wrong, and every insult he had thrown now looked foolish and childish, and he felt small in a way he had never felt before, because money could not protect him from the truth and power could not rebuild. The respect he had destroyed with his own words, Emily then turned to him, and with a voice as gentle as before, she said that respect was something every person deserved, no matter their background or their job, and she added that speaking another language did not make someone better, especially when it was used to hurt others rather than connect with them, and her words carried no hatred, only truth, which made them even more painful. The room stayed silent, waiting for Victor's response, but he had none, because everything inside him felt twisted and heavy, and he realized that the woman he mocked had more strength, more intelligence, and more integrity than he had ever shown in his life, and the weight of that truth pressed on him like a stone. Emily stepped back and allowed him a moment to speak, but he still could not form a proper sentence, and the shame in his eyes was clear to everyone, and for the first time since entering the restaurant, he looked away, unable to face the person he had tried to humiliate. The customers exchanged glances, whispering softly, and some shook their heads, disappointed by Victor's behavior, while others smiled proudly at Emily for standing up with such dignity and strength, and the entire atmosphere of the restaurant shifted, becoming calmer and warmer. Now that the truth had been revealed, Victor finally placed a hand on the table, not to show power, but to steady himself, because his legs felt strangely weak, and he understood that the situation had slipped far beyond his control, and no amount of wealth could fix it, and no amount of pride could hide it. Emily remained still, waiting with patience and compassion as the moment settled over the room like a quiet lesson, a reminder that arrogance always falls when faced with quiet truth. The evening sky glowed with soft orange light as the city rushed into its busy night, and tall buildings sparkled like giant crystals against the fading sun, and inside one of those glowing buildings stood a famous restaurant known for its luxury and expensive meals. Yet on this particular night, something far more unexpected was waiting to happen inside those shining walls, and that moment would change two lives forever. Adrian Hawley stepped out of his black luxury car and walked toward the entrance of the restaurant with calm steps and a tired mind, and although he was a billionaire with everything a person could wish for, he still carried a quiet loneliness in his heart, because his life was filled with meetings, businesses, responsibilities, and people who only wanted something from him. And tonight he simply wanted a peaceful dinner and a few hours to breathe in silence. As he entered the restaurant, the warm lights and soft music welcomed him, but something else caught his attention, far stronger than the smell of expensive food or the elegant decorations, and it made him stop in the doorway, as if time itself had frozen around him. His eyes narrowed and he blinked slowly, because he could not believe what he was seeing. Just a few feet away, Waitress, wearing a simple uniform, walked between the tables carrying a tray with careful hands, and though her steps were steady, her face looked tired and her eyes carried a weight that did not belong to someone so young. And then Adrian looked closer, and his heart skipped a beat, because he recognized her, or at least he thought he did, and the name on her small badge confirmed it completely. Her name was Maya Patel, the girl who once sat beside him in school, the girl who shared her lunch with him when he had nothing, the girl who made him laugh during days that felt impossible, the girl who dreamed of becoming an artist and painting the world in bright colors. He had not seen her since they graduated, and life pulled them in completely different directions. He became a billionaire. She became someone he never expected to see in this place, especially not like this. Adrian stood frozen as memories rushed back to him, the school hallways, the long talks, the promises she made about chasing her dreams, and the quiet kindness she always showed him when no one else cared. And now she was here, working as a waitress, moving quickly from table to table, avoiding eye contact and forcing a tired smile. Even when rude customers snapped their fingers at her or spoke to her without respect, something did not match the girl he remembered, because Maya was always full of life, always confident, always shining like she carried her own little sun inside her heart. But the Maya standing in front of him now looked dimmed, as if life had taken away that bright light and replaced it with stress, fear, and exhaustion. And Adrian felt a deep ache inside his chest, a strange mix of sadness and confusion. He Wanted to call her name, but the words stayed stuck in his throat because he was not ready for her reaction. Maybe she would reject him. Maybe she would be embarrassed. Maybe she would pretend not to know him, and that thought hit him harder than anything, because she was one of the few people from his past he truly cared about, and the idea of her struggling like this felt unbelievably wrong. Maya finally turned toward his table, and for a moment, their eyes met. Her step slowed, and her expression changed as if she felt something familiar too, but she quickly looked away and walked toward him with a professional smile. The kind of smile that hides pain and hides stories no one wants to share. And when she reached his table, her voice was soft, polite and distant as she asked a simple question that broke his heart more than she knew. "Welcome to Silver Garden. What can I get for you today?" Adrian stared at her, unable to speak for a moment, because the sound of her voice brought back memories. He forgot he even had memories of two friends laughing under a tree, memories of her handing him a drawing of them together, memories of her telling him that he should never give up because life always changes. He finally managed to answer, but his voice felt tight as he said he needed a moment to decide. As Maya walked away, Adrian watched her carefully. He noticed how she rubbed her hands together, as if they were sore, how she lowered her head when someone yelled at her, how she kept checking the time as if she was worried about being late for something else, and every detail told him one thing very clearly: she was struggling far more than she wanted anyone to know. And that thought filled him with a strong sense of worry and a sudden need to understand the truth. He knew he could not leave without talking to her. He knew something had happened, something big, something painful, something that forced her to give up her dreams and work here in silence. And as he watched her walk through the restaurant, he silently promised himself that he was going to find out what happened to Maya, no matter what it took, because seeing her like this was not something he could ignore any longer. And this night was about to become much more than a quiet dinner. The soft lights in the restaurant flickered gently as Maya moved between the tables with her careful steps and tired hands, and Adrian watched her every movement with growing concern, because something inside him kept whispering that the girl he remembered had changed in ways he could not yet understand, and that feeling made his heart beat faster with worry and confusion as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Maya carried plates with quiet focus while hiding the exhaustion on her face, and even though she kept smiling at customers, her smile never reached her eyes, which looked dim and distant, as if she had learned to lock her real feelings behind a hidden curtain. And this made Adrian study her closely, because he remembered her as the girl who once painted bright pictures during school breaks and laughed freely without fear. And seeing her now struggling silently filled him with a sadness he could not push away. When Maya returned to his table, she kept her eyes low and asked if he was ready to order, but her voice carried a small shake that did not belong to someone confident or relaxed. Adrian sensed that something heavy rested on her shoulders, something she did not want anyone to see, and he answered her gently while watching her reaction, hoping she might recognize him, or at least show a sign of their past friendship. But Maya simply nodded politely and stepped back, and for a moment, Adrian wondered if she truly did not remember him, or if she was pretending not to remember, because she did not want to face the past. And the more he thought about it, the more confused he became, because he knew no reason why she would avoid him unless something painful was hidden in her life. And that thought made him even more determined to talk to her before the night ended. As he looked around the restaurant, he noticed how the other employees moved quickly and nervously while keeping their eyes on the owner, who stood at the counter with a strict expression and crossed arms, and every time Maya or another waiter passed near him, he gave them cold, sharp looks that made them walk even faster, as if they feared upsetting him. And this small detail made Adrian feel uneasy, because no workplace should carry such fear and tension. A loud voice suddenly echoed across the room when a rude customer snapped his fingers at Maya, demanding water in a harsh tone, and Maya immediately hurried to him with an apologetic smile, even though she had done nothing wrong. And Adrian watched this scene with burning anger in his chest, because it reminded him of times in school when people treated him badly until Maya stood up for him, and he hated seeing her treated in the same way by strangers who knew nothing about her heart or her worth. As Maya poured the water, her hand trembled just slightly, and the customer complained again, saying she was too slow and too clumsy, and Adrian could see how she swallowed her emotions and apologized softly so she would not create trouble for herself, and this made him clench his fists under the table, because he could not understand why someone as gentle as Maya deserved such harshness, or why she had to fight alone without anyone supporting her. She hurried away from the table and passed by Adrian again, but this time he noticed something he had missed earlier. A small bandage on her left wrist, as if she had hurt herself recently, maybe from carrying too much or working too many hours. And the sight of that bandage cut into him like a silent warning that her life was not just tiring but possibly painful, and this deepened the storm growing in his heart. When she reached the back of the restaurant, she leaned against the wall for a second, then closed her eyes as if she needed to gather strength before continuing. And even though she tried to hide it, Adrian saw everything: her fear, her exhaustion, her attempts to stay calm, her effort to smile even when she wanted to cry, and he knew these signs too well because he had faced them long ago when he had nothing, and Maya was the only person who helped him rise again. Took a deep breath and made a decision he would not leave without speaking to her properly. He needed to know what happened to her, what forced her to live this way, what took away her dreams, and why she felt the need to hide her real emotions behind a mask of politeness and silence. And even though he did not know how she would react, he was ready to face anything because he could not forget the past they shared. He pushed his chair back and stood up slowly, watching Maya as she carried another tray toward the kitchen, and as she disappeared behind the tall silver door, he followed with careful steps, hoping he could talk to her away from the customers and away from the judging eyes of the strict owner and his